Good evening and welcome to Legal Talk, the talk show brought to you by the law offices of O'Donnell, Weiss, and Megay. Your life, your business, your law firm. We're at 347 Bridge Street in Phoenixville, where we've been since, how about guys, 2001, so 17 years now. And we're at 41 High Street in Pottstown, where we've been since 1955. My name's Dave Megay, and I'm an attorney at the office, and I'm joined tonight by Jim Kovaleski at my immediate left, and Joe Koury to his left. Guys, thanks for joining us.
Thank you,
and folks, thanks for joining Legal Talk. Tonight, Joe and Jim and I are going to talk about real estate transactions, but in particular, we're going to talk about the huge value that realtors bring to real estate transactions. Obviously, Joe, they bring a lot of value, and Jim, when the realtor lists and helps the homeowner sell the property. But folks, we're also going to talk, or tonight I should say, we're going to talk about homeowners, property owners selling properties by themselves without a realtor. However, we're going to talk about the value and the role that a realtor can play even in that type of transaction. And then in the second half of the show, guys, I'd like to talk about the nitty-gritty and we don't have a lot of time, but the nitty-gritty of an agreement of sale.
Sure. You got to get a plug for the lawyers in somewhere, right?
Perfect, exactly, right. The nitty-gritty of the terms of an agreement of sale, property disclosure statement, and that type of thing. So, folks, we, as an office, a lot of us do, Joe does, Jim does, I do, pretty substantial number of real estate transactions throughout the year, all shapes and sizes. Everything from Joe handles a half a double sale of a property or half a double in Royersford to Jim handling a large commercial tract being sold in Limerick, say. We also do, and we're also agents for title insurance, a title insurance company, Fidelity National Title Insurance Company, where we handle transactions on behalf of buyers and lenders and issue title insurance as agents for title insurance, Fidelity National Title Insurance Company. So if any of these things are tickling your fancy or are of an interest to you folks, give us a call at 610-323-2800 or 917, oh God, just blanked, 917-9347, area code 610. And then we're at www.owmlaw.com. Joe, Jim, I went on a long harangue giving a commercial for OWM today. But let's jump into what we call FSBO's FSBA, or FSBO, for sale by owner. Jim, I'm going to sell my house in Spring City, and I've lived there forever. I don't need a realtor, I don't think. But you're going to find out, folks, you still do. Well, I'll toss it to Jim. Jim, I'm selling my house. I want to sell it on my own. I don't need to call a realtor, do I?
Actually, the first thing I'm going to recommend you do is call a realtor for the purpose.
Well, no, Joe or Jim, I want to sell the house on my own. I don't want to pay that commission.
Even if you don't want to pay the commission, I think it's valuable to have a realtor involved, at least in the beginning, to give you a value of the house. You've lived there. You might have an idea of what houses go for in your neighborhood, but you're not going to know what the market's doing at that given time. You may not know what the house down the street sold for specifically and why it sold for that, meaning was there upgrades, was there a difference between your house and their house. So realtors can be very valuable in helping you determine what is the appropriate price, because it's not always just what is it worth, it's also what can you list it for, which is two different things sometimes. Right. Meaning you might, if you want to sell it quickly, you might lower it. If you think you can get a premium because of something different in your house, you can maybe bump up that asking price. But the realtors are going to be very helpful for that.
Well, Joe, I hear what Jim's saying, and yeah, that sounds great. But Joe, I know what my house is worth because I went on the internet, Zillow. What's the other one? Trulia. So I don't need. I hear what Jim's saying, but I don't need to talk to a realtor. Can I just go with that number that I found online?
Well, I think you do so at your peril for the reasons that Jim just said. You're just guessing at that point.
Right.
And, like anything else on the internet, I think you take it at face value
Right.
at best.
Right. Plus, also, I don't know why my neighbor sold.
Right.
Okay, it's roughly the same house, but I don't know why they sold. Maybe the neighbor sold cheap because the neighbor was desperate. Maybe the neighbor had financial problems.
Yeah.
Maybe the neighbor was anxious to move wherever the heck they were moving, somewhere south or west or whatever. Maybe the neighbor sold high, Joe, because maybe the neighbor got lucky and found a buyer and snookered a buyer, perhaps. Or maybe sold it to a family member who didn't do the homework that we're talking about here today.
The other thing where realtors really, I think, give value, and it's related to what you were just talking about, is they can advise as to trends and take a look at your house and make recommendations to get it market ready, so to speak.
Yeah.
They may say the kitchen, redoing the whole thing, probably a little cost prohibitive, but you could do this to brighten it up because people like bright kitchens.
Right.
Now, that's an obvious example,
Right,
but
right.
realtors certainly, they get in and out of a lot of homes. They see the trends. They know what moves sales, so to speak. So I
Okay.
think they can really bring some value in that
Okay.
regard.
Yeah, and I recommend, guys, and I mean, kind of take my play acting hat off for a minute and be an attorney again. I also recommend that for all the reasons you guys are talking about, that the FSBO seller, the for sale by owner seller, develop a relationship with a realtor, pay a realtor at the beginning to do what we call CMAs, comparative market analysis, or maybe hire an appraiser to do a full-blown appraisal.
Sure.
Give it the old college try to see if they could sell the property on their own. If the seller can't, or if the seller grows impatient, then they have a relationship with a local realtor. They can call up and say, "Hey, I tried. I'm tired of fooling around with it. Let's get it on the market." Also, Jim, realtors do a great job, even if the seller decides to sell the property with a realtor. Doesn't the realtor do a great job with vetting potential buyers with their financial wherewithal to buy the property?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest common misconceptions out there is that all realtors do is advertise the property on the MLS or something like that. No, they go well beyond that. They do vet buyers, meaning they look. There's forms out there where they get information from the buyers. They know if they have two comparable offers, they're able to look and probably guide a buyer or seller to tell them this one is a stronger offer because this buyer is stronger. Maybe they're already pre-approved for the loan. There's multiple factors that they look at, and because they deal with it day in, day out, they can spot those and say this is a good sign, this is a red flag, and really help a seller out. Plus, they might even bring buyers themselves. So they may have already pre-vetted some buyers that they've been working with and know that they're good sources or a good potential to purchase a property.
And Joe, one more commercial for the realtors, then we need to talk about the value of having an attorney involved in the transaction. But one more commercial for the realtors, in addition to what Jim said about vetting buyers, it's just the practical logistics of entertaining offers from buyers. Because for sale by owner, FSBO seller, they need to be there and walk buyers through the property, and they could end up walking what my wife would call a looky-loo, a tire kicker.
Right, tire kicker.
Tire kickers, which is a waste of time for those sellers. So the realtors, they certainly earn their keep, that's for darn sure.
Yep.
But with all that being said, let's start talking about the role of an attorney. And whether you're using a realtor or not, but especially in the area of for sale by owner. Go ahead, Joe.
Before we move on,
please,
I think
go ahead.
in addition to a realtor, before we start getting into the lawyer's role, I think even with the FSBO, another person that may be used either in conjunction with the realtor on that basis or just independently would be a home inspector.
Yeah.
And you might want to bring, well, not might, you definitely want to bring a home inspector in and pay a couple bucks to make sure the house is up to code before you list it, either with or without the realtor. Make any necessary repairs to make it market ready.
Right, and again, not many people know a home inspector Not many people have a home inspector as part of their family, but lots of people know a realtor, or lots of people know an attorney,
Sure.
or have a realtor and or an attorney in their family. Talk to he or she about a reference or referral of a home inspector. That's a great
Sure.
idea. Before you even put the property on the market, do your homework, folks, regarding value, using a local realtor. Do your homework regarding the houses, your home's use and occupancy permit requirements,
Sure.
and fitness for habitability with a home inspector.
Yeah.
Okay,
And just
go ahead.
to put one more point on what you were talking about a minute ago, Dave, with realtors being available for even the tire kickers and so on and so forth. I think they're also valuable in the sense that if you're selling the home by yourself and you're evaluating every offer yourself, you're a little close, perhaps, too close to that transaction to give the critical distance and evaluation that a realtor perhaps could offer,
Right.
which is somewhat what you said a minute ago, Jim.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so as we're winding down the first half of the show, folks. And, oh, by the way, we're taping the show in, what are we now, March?
March.
So the season for real estate selling, I hope, fingers and toes crossed, is upon us, I hope. So folks, if you're out there interested in selling your home this spring, I hope you're watching. And maybe you can watch the show a couple times and get the real feel, and then give us a call. We'd be happy to refer you to some local realtors. But let's tee up, Joe, while I have you on the hot seat. Tee up for me, please, the documents that our viewers, the sellers that are out there, need to have in place if they're going to do a for sale by owner. And then the second half of the show, we'll talk about the nitty-gritty of those documents. But
Sure. Well, off the top of my head, I can think of two documents for a seller, one of which is in all transactions. But with regard to sellers, there's the seller's disclosure statement,
Okay.
which is required almost all the time.
Right.
And then the second document I can think of is the actual agreement of sale.
Agreement of sale. Now, Jim, the seller's property disclosure statement that Joe mentioned, I don't always have to do that if I'm the seller, do I? Off the top of your head, do you know roughly, do you know the conditions where it's mandatory and where it's optional?
So it's easier to say where it's not mandatory.
Yeah.
That's if it's a new sale, if it's not residential, if it's commercial, if the individual is already on title. So if it's going from, say, 2 people to 1 person.
I didn't even think about that one.
Yeah.
Right.
But for the vast majority, you're still going to be required. For the vast majority of transactions, you're going to be required to prepare it.
The other big exception, Jim, and maybe you were just about to say it, is if the home is being sold through an estate.
Right. I was just going to tee that up. We have a 45 seconds here. But, so my cousin dies, and I'm the executor of the estate. I've never lived in the property. I don't have to do a seller's property disclosure statement.
Correct.
What if I know that there are problems with the property? And by the way, folks, the problems need to be those that affect the habitability or the value of the property. What if I know there are problems with the property? Can I hide behind the fact that I'm an executor?
No, if
Yeah.
your cousin always told you the roof
Yeah.
leaked,
Yeah. So I have to disclose the problems that I know or that I should have known with reasonable inspection existed.
But otherwise, no, because again, you think about the policy, it's your cousin, you never heard anything,
Right.
you never lived there, you know nothing about the property.
Perfect.
So-
Perfect. So, folks, please stay tuned for the second half of the show. We're talking about selling real estate with or without a realtor. We talked about with. Second half of the show, we're going to be talking about selling your home without a realtor. So you're watching Legal Talk. Please stay tuned for the second half.
For over 50 years now, O'Donnell, Weiss, and Mattei have helped their clients resolve a wide variety of legal challenges. OWM Law provides legal representation to clients throughout southeastern Pennsylvania. The attorneys and highly trained support staff utilize the latest technology and resources available to satisfy the needs of their clients. O'Donnell, Weiss, and Mattei, delivering the highest level of professional service.
Welcome back to Legal Talk, the talk show brought to you by Your Life, Your Business, Your Law Firm, O'Donnell, Weiss, and Metay Law Offices. We're in Phoenixville, we're in Pottstown, and we're at www.owmlaw.com. I'm Dave Megay, and I'm joined by Jim Kovaleski to my left and Joe Koury to his left. If you're just tuning in, we're talking about for sale by owner real estate. We're talking about selling your home without a realtor. However, if you're just turning in, you've got to watch the show the next time it airs, because in the first half of the show, we talked about the value that a realtor brings to the transaction, whether you're using a realtor to sell your property or whether you're selling the property on your own. Now, folks, we ended the first half of the show. I think it was Joe was talking about seller's property disclosure statement, but I want to get to Jim. Jim, what kind of questions does that property disclosure statement ask?
It's a pretty all-inclusive form in the sense that it's, I think, 7 or 8 pages long. It asks about everything that you would think about your house. So when was the last time the roof was installed? When was the last time windows were installed? What kind of plumbing do you have? What kind of pipes are there? What improvements were made? Did you get the proper permits when you made those improvements? I mean, it goes that far. So it's really it's a form, but it's a form that covers a lot of different things about the house, and it's a very important form, and it's something that you should actually sit down and take a good bit of time when you're going through it.
It should take more than 1 cup of coffee.
Absolutely.
Because isn't it about, excuse me, 5, 6 pages, I think?
At
roughly.
least, yep.
Yeah, and Joe, don't you need to disclose all of the warts associated with the property that you know or should know exist?
Yeah.
And Joe, I'm a big fan, if you're doing it for sale by owner, well, heck, even if you're using a realtor, with our help, with your attorney's help, I'm a big fan of having that document done at the beginning, before you even start marketing the property.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Good.
I
good.
mean, think about it. A well-educated buyer is a good buyer,
Absolutely.
potentially, because you're heading off issues.
Right. And folks, the seller's property disclosure statement protects you, the seller, if you know that the roof in the below the porch in the back extra room, breezeway or something, always leaks.
Yep.
You need to disclose that in the seller's property disclosure statement, because if you do and the buyer doesn't notice it, buyer buys it anyway in November, and in March when the rains come, that roof starts leaking, they're going to threaten to sue you, the seller.
Yep.
And then how you protected, Joe?
By the disclosure
You've
statement.
disclosed it, folks. But it's also the opposite's true.
Yeah.
It protects the buyer, because if Joe knows that his roof is leaks and he doesn't disclose it, and that roof does indeed leak in the spring, I can sue Joe for, it's a fraud thing, isn't it? It's fraud for failing to disclose.
Sure
So
is.
that proper disclosure statement protects the buyer against bad guy, fraudulent, misrepresenting sellers, and it protects the seller if the seller makes a full and fair disclosure.
Absolutely. And just
Go ahead.
that's why it's so important for the seller to accurately complete it, but it's also very important for the buyer to review it in depth and even have it reviewed
Yeah.
by your inspector.
Yeah, I've had situations, not happen too often, but the buyer calls and they're upset because there's water in the basement, or there's termite issues, or there's a leaky roof. And right away I think, oh boy, that seller must have defrauded the buyer. The seller must have failed to disclose. And I'll say to the buyer, hey, let me see that property disclosure statement. And I look through it, and sure enough, it says, oh, by the way, there's termites in the back on the porch, or there's leaky roof in my child's bedroom. And I say to the buyer, didn't you see this? Nah, I didn't look at it. But your initials are on the bottom. So you can see how it protects the buyer and the seller. Now, Jim, we talked about the seller's property disclosure statement. Tell us about the seller. Maybe the two of you can take me through, in your mind's eye, the high points of an agreement of sale.
Absolutely. So very basic things that need to be done correctly. Who's buying and who's selling? Making sure you get the right names on the agreement of sale. I don't know how many times I see it where the property's in a husband and wife's name, but only one of them is listed as the seller. So you have to go back and fix it. So make sure you know who's buying and who's selling.
Well, and also I've seen where the names aren't spelled right,
Yep.
or maybe the seller is Mr. and Mrs. John Jones, but John's nickname's Butch, and I've seen the agreement of sale with Butch Jones and Carol Jones, but Butch Jones doesn't own the property.
No,
so technically, a good buyer's attorney could argue that we never had an agreement of sale.
correct.
So, go ahead.
So very important to make sure you get the proper parties. Next thing, proper property that's going to be transferred, proper real estate. So you have to identify it. Certain counties use parcel numbers, things like that, so it's additional information you can add to the address to make sure you're identifying, and everyone understands it's this half of that double, not the other half of that double, or the property down the street or anything like that. So you've got proper parties identified, proper real estate identified.
Address, tax parcel number,
Yep.
deed book and page, perhaps.
The more the better.
County, township, school district.
yeah.
Yep.
Maybe even acreage. Parentheses 4.7 acres plus/minus.
Sure.
Sometimes zoning too.
Absolutely. Well, as a matter of fact, Joe, not to get too esoteric, but there's a provision in the agreement where you have to name the zoning district that
Right.
it's in.
Yep.
And I think, off the top of my head, if it's not in there, I think the agreement could be nullified. I think. I could be wrong.
If you're
but I
using the
think
standard
so.
agreement, I
Standard
believe that,
agreement of
yes.
sale form. Joe, we talked in the first half about purchase price, so that would go next in the agreement of sale.
Sure.
But you and I are working on a matter where the deposit is really important. Give me a couple thoughts on how much deposit, who wants a higher amount, who wants a lower amount, and who holds the deposit.
Well,
That's a curveball, by the way. So I hope you're ready.
let me answer part A of that question. So obviously the deposit is important. It is down money, so to speak. It's what binds.
It's a commitment to buy the
It's
property.
a commitment to buy, and it binds the seller to
Right.
that potential buyer.
Right.
The seller obviously wants more money for the
Down.
deposit,
Right.
down, for a number of reasons. One of which is psychological, I would think.
Yeah.
The higher the deposit, the more the seller thinks this buyer's serious about my property.
Right.
This is gonna happen, so to speak.
Right.
Most buyers, they want to put a lesser amount down
'Cause they want
unless they
less at
really,
risk.
less at risk. But some transactions, buyers themselves want to show, I'm serious about this. I'm going to put a higher deposit amount in, so to speak. The deposit could be anywhere from 5 to 30%, really.
Right.
It's
I
sort of
remember-
all over the place.
I remember when I started almost 32 years now, guys. My very first boss said, who taught me how to do real estate transactions from a lawyer standpoint, when you're a seller, don't ever accept less than 20% down. Don't ever do a deal less than 20% down. Now that was back in the mid 80s. 20%, you don't see 20% down very often anymore.
No.
But Joe, your point is good. The seller wants more, the buyer wants less. The seller wants more of a commitment, so put your money where your mouth is, buyer. The buyer wants less money at risk. Who holds the? Oh, go ahead, Jim.
Actually,
is that where you're going?
I was gonna
Because you
go-
and I have had that issue through the years.
Absolutely. Sorry to jump on you there because I got excited because this was a topic that came up with one of our firm's clients. So it was a broker that I was speaking to, and
Who
about
did we represent in that deal?
it was just a general question from a real estate broker.
Okay.
She asked me, you know, there's these regulations that I'm subject to if I hold it, because oftentimes it's a broker that's holding the deposit. And there is a whole series of regulations that are out there that law in Pennsylvania as to what the broker can and cannot do with that deposit, even to how quickly it must get deposited into the deposit or to their account.
Yeah.
Her question to me was, what if I name a third party? Are they subject to those same regulations? And they may or may not be. So you have to be careful as to who's going to hold the deposit. You want to make sure it's somebody that's going to, if it's not a broker, it's going to be somebody that's subject to some sort of rules, fiduciary responsibility, so that they're not just putting that 10% in their checking account and just maybe using it to buy groceries later that day because they didn't balance their checkbook. So it's very important as to who holds that deposit.
Along those lines, in the FSBO context, for sale by owner context, oftentimes you see an attorney, and if you're the seller,
Right.
and if you're representing the seller as the seller's attorney, you want to be the one holding
Right.
that deposit.
And that's exactly where I wanted to go next. I thought Jim was going there. He almost did. But yeah, I agree. When I represent the seller, I want to hold the deposit on behalf of the seller.
Right.
But how many
And an
go ahead.
attorney is a fiduciary.
Yes.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
we have rules
We
of
have-
professional responsibility,
right.
so on and so forth.
How often have you seen where the buyer has said, hey, my sister runs a title company, I'll have her hold my deposit. And when you're the seller, when I'm the seller or the seller's attorney, that's not good enough. That's not good enough because that's not a commitment. Not only is it the buyer's sister who has an obligation to her sister and no one else, but she's a title company, so she has an obligation to the buyer, not to my client, the seller. So I never like that. Never like that when the buyer's deposit's being held by someone who has a duty to the buyer. Because in my world, in our world, they might as well not even put a deposit down, which makes their offer weak. All right, guys, we have a few minutes, but Joe, what are some of the contingencies in the agreement of sale that our viewers should be thinking about before they call us to prepare that agreement of
Yeah,
sale?
and before we
Go ahead.
even get into those points, contingencies are essentially what they sound like. They're conditions that have to be met for the sale to go forward. And with regard to the deposit, and we talked about risk with the deposit a minute ago, oftentimes what you see is if a buyer's contingency is not satisfied and the buyer calls the deal off, they should be entitled to the return of their deposit. And that was that issue that we're working on. Exactly. Exactly.
That's the whole idea of the contingency is to protect the buyer. If the contingency, or condition is not fulfilled, then the buyer gets their deposit back.
And the transaction's off.
And the transaction's off.
The first contingency that I can think of in the standard form is the mortgage contingency. So unless it's a cash deal, and most deals are not, the ability for the buyer to go out and obtain a mortgage from a third-party lender within a time certain at a certain amount, and I can't even specify at an interest rate not to exceed 4% in today's market, although that's probably quickly disappearing.
Yeah, Joe, you just said that the mortgage contingency actually can even dictate the amount, the maximum of the interest rate that the person could accept.
Right.
Now, if I don't get that mortgage because I lost my job or because I don't know, whatever reason. Oh, property doesn't appraise, which is the issue you and I are working on.
Right.
Then, do I, the buyer, I can declare the agreement null and void, and I can get my deposit back.
Correct.
All right. What if I didn't apply for the mortgage in a timely fashion? What if I didn't cooperate with the mortgage lender? What if I provided falsified information or just didn't cooperate with the mortgage lender? Then maybe I've blown my mortgage contingency protection.
Correct. And the falsified information is an obvious one where you've definitely blown the contingency.
Yeah. Okay. What's the next contingency? I almost said it.
There's a laundry list in the standard agreement.
Inspection, I was thinking
inspection.
Of. Yeah.
Which can involve a lot. Sewer is a pretty common one.
Water, or septic system water, boundary lines, homeowners insurance, radon, termite, home inspection. I don't know if
Said
you
that.
mentioned
Home
that.
inspection, title insurance.
Title insurance. Now, Jim, how important are the dates? Are the inspection dates? Pretty darn important because if you don't make them,
you've lost your opportunity to have that contingency. So if you have 10 days, you don't get the report done in 10 days.
You've blown it.
You've blown it.
Yeah,
Speaking
the
of blown,
contingency period is just, you have your contingencies within which if you elect a contingency and you get the report back, for instance, you're either happy or you're not happy, but if it doesn't automatically call the deal off then unless you pull the plug, so to speak, within that contingency period.
Speaking of calling the deal off, we have to call the show off. We have 30 seconds, 20 seconds, counting down. So I'm going to stop you both. Joe Koury, Jim Kovaleski, Dave Megay, OWM Law, Legal Talk. Give us a shout. Get on our website, owmlaw.com, or 610-917-9347 or 323-2800. Your business, your life, your law firm. Have a great night, folks.